This video is for all you photography DIYers out there. Get help. Get help now. It's not too late. DIY isn't something you get into, really. It's not like lacrosse or championship figure skating. DIY is much more than that. It's a way of life. It's an attitude, a bad attitude, I will grant you that. It's a way of thinking and acting that is very pathological. But that's what we're going to talk about today. I have written a short article. I've done a live stream event where we talked about DIY. And this is the third part. This fills in the gaps because what I'm going to do today is show you what DIY is. So I'm going to walk you through a DIY project. Now it's a 3D printing DIY project, and I am not going to attempt to teach you all I know about 3D printing, even though that would only take about 11 seconds. I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to try to show you how to make the thing that I made. I'm not even going to talk much about the software. I'm just going to show you the steps that are involved. Every one that I had to do to get from an idea to a finished product. Product sounds like it's something that I would give to other people, but no, most of the DIY stuff I do, I don't let other people see. As we go through each step of this project, I am going to point out a few of the characteristics of a DIYer that you may or may not recognize in yourself, but I think that they're important. Before we get into this specific project, I have a warning. Avoid enthusiastic people at all costs and do not ask them for advice. They are literally the worst people in the world to ask for advice. There are two kinds of enthusiastic person. One is dangerous, one is deadly. The dangerous one is the genuine enthusiast because they're a friend of yours. They want you to get the same joy out of the hobby that they do. So they will stop at nothing to get you to buy the same hand plane or kayak or whatever it is. They want you to enjoy it as much as they do. They want you on board. Then there's the deadly kind. This is the disillusioned but unaware of it enthusiast. This is somebody who's not really enthusiastic anymore. They were enthusiastic at the beginning when they bought their first Hasselblad. A sure sign that you're dealing with a failing enthusiast is when the consumption of expensive camera equipment goes through the roof. The mechanism behind this odd behavior is the enthusiast is subconsciously recognizing the fact that he's no longer enthusiastic and he's trying to treat that lack of enthusiasm with more gear. We know that that works, but only in the very short term. So what happens is the enthusiasm wanes as the new equipment rises. So the poor ex-enthusiast doesn't know any of this. He just keeps buying more gear and convincing himself he still loves the hobby. This is the sunk cost fallacy. He's thinking in his subconscious, mind you, that he's already spent so much money on this hobby, he better be enthusiastic about it. So he's sticking with it even after the thrill is gone. Don't ask him for advice. Do not ask advice from a failing enthusiast. They are going to tell you everything that they need to tell you for you to buy a Hasselblad because it's the only way that they can convince their unconscious mind that they're actually enthusiastic. They're not. They don't know it. They won't know it till later. But in the meantime, they can infect you. And you just don't need that. So who do you ask for advice? Well, obviously, you ask me for advice. I am completely unenthusiastic and dispassionate about all of this stuff. I just was not permitted as a young man to show enthusiasm, or really anything. I was not allowed to show any kind of emotion. You're safe with me, but avoid the enthusiast. Otherwise, you're going to end up with more Hasselblads than you'll know what to do with, and then quit anyway. So what we're going to do is I'm going to walk you through this very simple project. The project is I'm going to make one of these. I made 5 of them yesterday. And the first one's the hard one, obviously, because that's the prototype. And I didn't do it myself. I needed help because when I started, I didn't know how to use the CAD, the computer aided drafting program. It's called Confusion 360, and I didn't know how to use it then. I don't know how to use it now, to be honest, and you'll see that in just a minute. But I'm going to walk you through every step of going from an idea that's this shape to a thing that's this shape, and something that you can use and something that works. And if I say so myself, something that is really, really good looking. It is. It is. It's fantastic. You've got to see it up close. It's lovely. So let's make one of these, and along the way, I'll tell you a few things about DIY. The first requirement for DIY-manship, you have to be creative. You have to be able to think of an idea and come up with everything about that idea that can take it from the vague thought of something to a solid product. And you need to be able to imagine that in your mind. You need to think, well, I've got this lens and I can't hold it up. It's too heavy to be on the camera by itself, but I need it to be stable, but I need it to move. I need it to be supported somehow, but it's got odd sizes. They don't make stuff in that size. So what am I going to do? And then you have to think through, well, I could make something like this, or I could make 3 somethings like this. It depends. How big is the lens? How long is the lens? How heavy is the lens? So you have to think through all of that, and all the time be tweaking and changing the idea that you're having about what it's going to look like. As you get into it, you realize, oh, that's not going to be big enough. I need to make it wider or heavier or thicker or use a different material. And you need to be doing this constantly. And that is the first thing I think of being a DIY photographer, is the ability to problem solve using your creativity. So the first job for this was to actually put my ideas onto a piece of paper. That's a crucial first step, because when you actually draw something, you use a different part of your brain than when you just think about it, and it causes you to be far more aware of the decisions you're making. This was actually the drawing, and I'll put a better picture of it up here. This was the drawing that I made one afternoon as I was thinking about the support system, kind of like a tripod collar, but different, you'll see, with some built-in shock absorption. So this was what I wanted to build. The first step only took an hour or 2. So once the drawing was done, I realized that my skills in Confusion 360 were so vestigial and so formative that there was no way I could create that in any kind of reasonable time. So I reached out to a friend of mine, Larry Strunk, who's one of my Patreon supporters and a supporter of the channel and an all-round good guy, as well as a brilliant engineer. I talked to Larry and I said, Larry, I want to make this thing, but I have to go through the step of creating a CAD file for it, so that I can then print it. And he said, well, he'd give it a go for me. And that's what he did. I sent him over the drawings. He looked at them, thought they were rubbish. Didn't say that, though, because he's a good DIYer. You have to be tolerant if you're a DIYer. That's another one. So he looked at the drawings, and then he designed something that would actually work, that had enough strength where it needed strength, and a flexibility where it needed that. And he made it in such a way that it could be scaled, meaning I could, with a single number change, I could adjust my drawing from this to this, which is the bigger size. And then there is a bigger size than this, which we're getting ready to print. And all of this is possible to a DIYer if you understand the tool. And in this case, the tool is a program. Every single DIY project you undertake is going to use a tool or multiple tools, and some of them are in completely different disciplines. So a true photographic DIY aficionado is something of a Renaissance man. So Larry, having done that second step for me, it was up to me to do the third step, which was to take that drawing and move it into a second computer program, this one called a slicer, which prepares the files for the 3D printer. And I had to learn how to do that. So I'll show you that real quick, and then we'll head back to the printer. The way a parametric program works, as Larry was putting in the different dimensions to build this this device, this object, it was storing all of that information in a file. And we can change that information but simply by going to this modify, go down to the bottom to change parameters, and it'll open up the whole table of different measurements that Larry put in. But he's got it set up such that if I click on a particular measurement, like in this case, the size of the outside diameter of the tube that I'm supporting, I can change it to a larger size like I just did there, and the program will change everything else so that the model remains consistent with the original design. In other words, it keeps the center of the optical axis right where it's supposed to be, and it changes other things so that it all fits into the right package. And that's exactly what he did here. So I look around it, make sure everything's okay. So when I click on this Build tab, it gives me a series of options to choose. And the most important one is highlighting the body or the element that I want to print. You don't want to print the whole drawing, you just want to print the thing you're making. So that is what I did. I highlighted this and picked that as the thing that we're sending to the printer. Then everything else was set up ahead of time. I had already told the program that I used a Prusa printer, so it knew to send it to Prusa Slicer. Then I click OK, and it sends the drawing over to the Prusa Slicer, ready to slice. Now, what this does is it takes the CAD drawing and makes it into a file that the printer can use to actually put the plastic together in the right order. Once you're in Prusa Slicer, it's just a matter of positioning the object where you want it in a way that it'll be able to print without having to print in thin air. You check that it's in the best orientation for the printer to work with. And then when you're done, you hit the slice button. And what that does is it converts the software into a program that the 3D printer can use. Then we're going to export that file as what's called G-code, which I am going to, in this case, put on a small SD card that came with the printer. And then we'll take the SD card down, plug it into the printer, and that'll be the instructions to print this model. So it sounds pretty simple. The devil's in the details. There's a lot of ways to mess this up, but I show you this just so that you can see that this is another fairly involved step for somebody who's new to 3D printing. So you'd need to take into account the time this would take. So I have taken the card down to the other studio so that we can get the 3D print going. But I had to come find a clamp to hold the camera. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to clean off the bed with some alcohol. I'm going to turn on the printer. The card actually goes upside down in this little slot in the back, somewhere here, and it will sort through the files, and what we need to do is find the one that we just saved. So I just press the button and it checks the file. We're printing it in black, and it's going to heat up the bed, heat up the extruder, and then it's going to run a test pattern to make sure that I didn't clean the thing. This is crucial. If you don't clean this bed with alcohol, the plastic will not stick properly, and that is a bad thing. So I give it a good liberal cleaning with 91% ethanol, and it evaporates instantly on that hot bed. It's dribbling little filaments of PLA out of the extruder as it heats up. We're up to 208 degrees, so very nearly ready to start printing. It says it's going to take 3 hours and 47 minutes to finish. I'll set the time lapse to run for a lot longer than that. I want you to see the thing calibrate though before we go on to the time lapse. All right, it woke up. Okay, so it's going to find the bed and then tap it a few times to make sure it knows where it is. This is so that it doesn't run into the bed as it's doing the printing. Then it'll go up to the corner. It'll print out a line of plastic to make sure that the extruder is working. And then it'll start the print. And the clock starts now. The first one of these I did was a disaster. The plastic didn't stick properly and it all got tangled up. But ever since then, it's been doing a fantastic job. So this is the outline of the print, and it's just going to keep making these odd noises and zipping around for 3.5 hours. Kind of fun to watch. I'm going to turn on the time lapse so that you can see this develop. This is my workshop. This is where I do most of my projects, most of my DIY stuff is out here. But you don't need anything like this. I started doing DIY with virtually nothing and then would get inexpensive tools when I needed them. And I was able to make some pretty cool stuff. But as I was thinking about how to sum this up, because this is one of those videos that I wasn't exactly sure where I wanted it to go, other than the fact that I wanted you to see my new 3D printer. But as it's gone along, I've been thinking a lot about DIY and the way that there probably needs to be a better word for it, actually. DIY does not encompass everything that I'm talking about. I'm talking about a special kind of DIY that's specific to the photography that we do. About the only group of people that are more into DIY with their photography are the Astro guys. So while the prints were being made, I put together a list of personality attributes, if you will, things that I've noted in people who are really, really good at solving their way out of problems with clever physical, mechanical, electrical solutions. In other words, great photographic DIYers. And as I was putting the list together, I certainly wasn't drawing from my own experience. You need to know that right from the start. I don't have many of these characteristics, but it occurred to me about halfway through that one person I know does have all of these characteristics. And I realized that I was writing this part of the video about my friend Chris Field. You met Chris a year or two ago now when I interviewed him after Green Planet. He's the motion capture photographer and videographer who worked with David Attenborough on that series. And he's a good friend of mine. Chris is the consummate DIYer. He doesn't make excuses for not having the right tool. He tries to figure out what other tool would do the job. I have never heard him make an excuse. So this video is a nod then to Chris Field, who is probably the inspiration for me even thinking to do this video. So Chris has got all of these characteristics and more. If you haven't seen the video where I interview Chris Field, it's worth going back and taking a look at because he's a remarkable guy. The comments alone are worth going back to read if you've never read them. I'll put a link to the video right here. So the first superpower that a great DIYer has is creativity, and with that, imagination. The ability to have an idea and then grow that idea into something real. And that's what a great DIYer does. He sees a problem, or an opportunity maybe, not just a problem, but a chance to make something better, sees that and thinks about how to do it, and then comes up with a concrete solution that he then uses his hands to build. There is no question that a good DIYer has to be as patient as a saint, because no matter how hard you try, in fact, trying hard is probably part of the problem, but no matter how hard you work, things go wrong. Things get screwed up, tools break, and you drop stuff. I drop stuff, I should say. You have to be patient and let the process take however long it's going to take. You can't rush how fast wood glue dries. Another attribute you'll see in great DIYers is the ability to take downtime, maybe unplanned downtime, like having to wait for something to set or waiting for a coating to dry. You can always do something else. There's always another job that can be done. And people who are frugal with their time make great DIYers. One has to be able to persevere. It's not just patience and waiting, but persevering and working during that time. You have to sometimes allow things to unwind, but be doing something constructive in the meantime, thinking of alternatives, maybe having a backup plan. I almost said you have to have a willingness to learn, but I think to be at the top of the game, you have to have a need to learn, a passion for learning. And that is certainly what I've seen in people like Chris, is always working on a new skill, a new understanding, new equipment. He's always learning something new, and that's key to this. Similar, but not exactly the same, is you need to have a real hunger for knowledge. I have done projects, simple projects, that required me to learn half a dozen new skills. If you aren't fascinated by the process of doing it, you won't do it. And if you don't do that, you can't broaden your scope or add more tools to your tool chest. A good DIYer is literally a jack of all trades. I said this at the beginning, there are different kinds of DIYers. And let me add quickly that Chris is in a different league altogether than me. I'm one of the guys that likes to make stuff, and I'm willing to put in the time and the effort, but I don't have any special gift for it. Chris has done this professionally and made a life out of it. So he's in a completely different category. But having said that, to be a decent DIYer, you have to have some kind of manual dexterity or ability with your hands. Because if you don't, you'll end up chopping one of them off. And nobody wants that. But it does make me think of another one that you've got to have, is a sense of humor. For when you do chop off a finger, or lose a contract or have your thing blow up on set. Yeah, all of these things require a sense of humor, because if you can't laugh at it, you shouldn't be doing it. There are two others that come to mind. One is the ability to fail well. There's failing well and there's failing badly. And Chris told us a story during the interview that we did where he described his approach to failure. And it has stuck with me. He definitely has the skill of failing well. I don't always have that. I find failure quite trying, and it will get in the way of my repeated attempts. So having the ability to fail but learn from it, fail but have something to teach from it, fail but have a funny story from it. There are ways that you can fail that pay dividends, and there are ways that you can fail that don't. The last one is more important, I think, to us as photographers, but it overlaps into this DIY attitude. And that is the ability to experience awe, to have a sense of awe when things just click and you see that perfect landscape or that perfect beetle or that perfect project come to fruition. If you can't feel that soul expanding sense of awe, then it probably isn't for you. I think you receive awe in direct proportion to what you put into something. And when you work hard and do the best you can, even if the project doesn't succeed, you can still be awestruck by the amount of progress you made or the work that you did. I feel that in a small way every time I do a project. It's deeply satisfying, and it amazes me that human beings can do this kind of stuff. So we got a little bit meta there at the end. Let me sum up by telling you what DIY is and what it isn't. What it is fun. It's good fun. It's mind-expanding fun. It's learning fun. It's a way to develop new skills and to develop new personality traits too, because not all of these traits are things you have when you start. Some of them you learn. You learn patience doing this. DIY then is an attitude. It's an attitude of wanting to expand our experience, whether that's of photography or of life. It's an opportunity to learn a lot of new skills, new talents, discover things about yourself. And it's an opportunity to lift your photography to a higher level. There is a definite overlap between doing this kind of work and the pride you have in your work product in photography. When you're building your own diffusers, your own lighting systems, your own tripods or whatever. Tripods, I don't know whether I was looking at my tripod when I said that. All of those things will add a sense of ownership to your pictures. So being a DIY photographer is more than just being a handyman, a lot more than just being a handyman. It's being a better photographer. What DIY is not, and I'm going to stress this, it is not a way to save time, and it is not a way to save money. Indeed, it is a big consumer of time, which is another reason why you should really like it if you're going to take it up. And it is a massive consumer of money. I have yet to make a project that didn't cost about 400% more than buying the next closest thing available was. So anybody who goes into DIY for photography to save money, you've missed the point badly. You may save some money if the only existing device of the kind you want is made by Hasselblad and it costs $9,000 and you can make it for $3. You'll save some money. Most of the time that's not the way it is. You end up making a $5 part for $50. If you're going to do this, if you're going to give it a try, go into it with your eyes wide open, go into it with a sense of fun, and go into it as a new thing to enrich your life. If you do that, you'll love DIY photography. It really, really pays off. Thank you so much for watching. Thank you for supporting my work. Those of you who belong to Patreon, thank you. Couldn't do this without you. I really mean that. I could not do this without you. So thank you, and please join me for the next thing, whatever that might be. I know that at the very least it's going to be a live stream on Tuesday at 8 o'clock in the evening. Failing that, there's Thursday at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. And there are videos coming out and interviews coming up and all kinds of things in the wings. And I will tell you what they are in due course. Until then, take care, be safe, and if you're going to be working out in your workshop or in your kitchen, be careful. Don't be distracted when you're working with tools. That's how people get hurt. We don't want you to get hurt. Take care. See you next time. Goodbye.